32 teams in 32 days. This is episode 14, the Minnesota Vikings episode. Let's welcome in Luke Braun, host of Locked On Vikings. Luke, what's going on?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
No problem, anytime. So, the Minnesota Vikings, it's been an interesting offseason, a lot to talk about with them. It seems as if the Vikings are trying to avoid the rebuild. Like they're inching towards it, and they're trying so hard to avoid it. They tried to fight for a backdoor playoff spot last year, almost beat Tampa in Tampa. The roster has talent, but for a team that seems to be going downhill since making a playoff run a couple years ago, I'll just say this. It is the future looking like a potential rebuild.
Oh, man, you're just going right to the existential stuff, huh? Look, the Wilfs, the owners of the Vikings, do not want to rebuild at all. They are not interested in sitting in this 5-11 hell that we're looking, they don't want to be where the Panthers are right now, where, we pick 8th and we couldn't, so we had to trade for Sam Darnold. They don't want to be where the Lions are, where it's like, all right, maybe we'll be competitive in 2024, and I guess good luck selling tickets until then. They don't want that. They think that the Vikings are a lot closer to being competitive than 7-9 would suggest because there are more years than last year, right? That said, the roster has experienced a lot of turnover. They've had a lot of guys get old, a lot of contracts expire. Guys kind of fall off like Xavier Rhodes and Everson Griffin and the kind of cornerstones of the franchise. And now they're looking to replace those guys. But I think the way the Vikings view it, they don't want to, rebuild for 4 years and then contend for one and then have that fall apart and rebuild for 4 years and then contend for one. They want to build a team that has a decent chance every single year, and they want to be in it every single year. And if it doesn't work out, that's unfortunate and that's a bummer, but that doesn't mean that they're going to go try to rebuild for 4 years just to try to get competitive again. They want to be competitive as consistently as possible.
It's like in Atlanta, the blanks. Same thing. They don't want to rebuild. They're hanging on to Matt Ryan. A lot of rumors that they might go quarterback. And I'm sitting here like, they might not. Because they're sitting there at 4. Kyle Pitts is going to be staring them down, potentially scoring 28, 29 a game with Kyle Pitts, Julio Jones, Russell Gage,
36 ain't what it used to be. At his age. That's not as old as he used to be for quarterbacks.
Right.
So you got Tom Brady just won a Super Bowl at 41. Right. You got time with Matt Ryan.
Yeah, so it's funny. There were a couple people that were on this podcast and, talking about the downfall of these NFC teams that have made the Super Bowl in the past couple of years. And, Falcons, they're still hanging on to Matt Ryan. The Eagles don't have Carson Wentz. The Rams no longer have Jared Goff. It's pretty much, and the Niners are inching towards a divorce with Jimmy Garoppolo. So it's like the Falcons are this one team that still has their quarterback. And looking at Minnesota, those two teams are very similar, hanging on to Kirk Cousins, even though his extension is just kicking in this year, which I think is crazy. They signed him to that type of extension, and it's just starting to kick in. So they have him for 2 more years. But it seems like they no interest in rebuilding, but the roster is talented, but not much of a free agency for the Vikings. There wasn't much cap space. They did bring in 2 new corners, 1 new face, 1 old face, Pat Peterson, and then Mackenzie Alexander. It was a depleted room last year for the Vikes last year. Cameron Dantzler impressed. Jeff Gladney did not. Bringing in 2 vets, what does this mean for the secondary?
Yeah, the free agency, I think people thought it was quiet because all people ever care about is offensive linemen, and they didn't go get a starting offensive lineman, so they think they did nothing. But Dalvin Tomlinson's a very good player, and I think Patrick Peterson still has some in the tank. I think the contract tells you a lot about what they think of Patrick Peterson. That contract is going to count $8 million on the cap for 2020 with a couple of incentives, and if he hits them, you pay it off next year, or in 2021, and then you pay it next year if he hits the $2 million in incentives that make it a $10 million deal. That ain't a lot for a quarterback. Shaq Griffin just got like $13.5 million. There are other cornerbacks making a lot more, and I think that's like barely top 20 cornerback money. And I think he's not a top 5 guy like he used to be, but he could be a top 20 guy if the Vikings ask a little bit less of him than Arizona did. Arizona asked him to be the kind of 1A man everywhere he goes, lock everybody down, have absolutely no help over the top, and we're going to use that to help out the rest of the defense and kind of scheme around it. And he just couldn't. He couldn't pay that out anymore. He couldn't pay off that ask. But that doesn't mean you need to go down to just completely hiding him like the Vikings did with, Chris Boyd or Cordrea Tankersley or whatever, random off the street names were starting for them at the end of the year. The secondary was a catastrophe. If they didn't get multiple new starters on that secondary, and now with both Mike Hughes' status in flux with an injury, and now Jeff Gladney with his off-field issue, that puts everything in flux. If you didn't get multiple starters, I think it would have been a catastrophic failure. So they had to. And finding Mackenzie Alexander at the price they found him at, finding Xavier Woods at the price they found him at, and fighting Patrick Peterson at what I think is a decent price, I think a justifiable at least. I think that's a rousing success for what was kind of an emergency situation that nobody paid attention to because we're all still mad about the offensive line because it's been the offensive line for like 6 years.
Right, and we're gonna talk about the O-line in a second. And with Peterson, it's funny because he didn't get cut, or no, they did cut him, did they? He got cut.
Which?
Peterson from Arizona. And then it was like
no, his contract expired, but Arizona got outbid for him, so they kind of tacitly let him go.
Because he posted that thing on Instagram where it's like he might be coming back to Arizona. It was like a picture of him and a couple of his teammates. So just people were like, okay, so you're gonna go back to Arizona? Vikings swooped in and took him.
Just like hanging out with friends, yeah.
they just like took him. But Dalvin Tomlinson, my mistake, very underrated player, and the Vikings D line has been a bit different, bit up and down the last couple of years, players coming in and out. We'll talk about Hunter in a second. Linval Joseph is gone, but they hope they can squeak out some production from Michael Pierce. How important is Dalvin Tomlinson to what Mike Zimmer is trying to do on the defensive line?
I think it's all gonna like linchpin around him. And I think the reason they got Dalvin Tomlinson, well, for one, defensive tackle wasn't their first choice. They actually went after Carl Lawson and Trey Hendrickson first when they struck out on those two guys. Then they said, okay, we're going to go get Dalvin Tomlinson, who they, I guess, think is a better player than, I don't know, one of the other edge rushers that's out there. And they decided, we'll go with the best player and we'll figure out how to use the positional value. But basically what Dalvin Tomlinson allows you to do is shore up a run defense that was an utter catastrophe. I would chalk up at least 3 of their losses in 2020 to run defense and run defense alone. Games where Kirk Cousins played fine, games where the offensive line wasn't a disaster, games where the rest of the defense did its job to the best of its ability, but the defensive line would let up these ridiculous chunk rushing plays. Like we all saw on Christmas what happened with Alvin Kamara scoring 6 touchdowns. Ezekiel Elliott had the game of his season against the Vikings. The only game I think he got over 100 yards was against the Vikings. He had a horrific season until he played the Vikings, then it got easy. And Derrick Henry did something very similar. It was a problem. And so shoring that up obviously is a huge thing. But against the pass, the thing is that the problem the Vikings had, because they couldn't trust their secondary, but they also couldn't trust their defensive line. So they had to kind of choose one to cover with safety help. So they had to take all the safeties out of the box, cover deep so you don't get smashed over the top every single play like what happened in week 1 against Green Bay. And then you basically have to give them a bunch of light boxes. They run into a bunch of light boxes. You can't exactly bring a safety in to help, so you have to ask a safety to cover a run fit from 35 yards back, and that's what Anthony Harris did. He made him look stupid a whole bunch of times. It was kind of, a Sophie's choice. Now that you can trust that front, you can keep the box light, and you can use safeties in coverage. You can have guys like kind of rove around, go for interceptions, jump routes, play aggressively, use a lot more resources in coverage. And you can just kind of say, and if they run up the middle, good luck getting past Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson. That is a strategy that Brandon Staley just took to a head coaching job. Patrick Graham in New York is using it very well. It's kind of a new wave in the NFL to lure you into running and then have, a really stout front that can kind of win one-on-one.
Yeah, and so Danielle Hunter says he wants a raise, willing to get traded in order to get it. Where do you think the two sides are at right now, and can we see Hunter playing in a different jersey come September 12th?
I would be surprised if Hunter was not a Viking in 2021 when the season started. I think ideally you'd wait for him to play out the season, and then if you played out the season, he's dealing with a herniated disc in his neck. That's the kind of thing that if it doesn't heal properly and there's not a lot of control you have over that, you just kind of have to, it's a dice roll, and that's something that if you lose that dice roll, it could end careers, and it has before. So I think the Vikings are playing that a little bit cautious. Danielle Hunter thinks he's already earned a pay raise, right? And he says, well, I shouldn't have to go out and earn this money again. I've been all world for you for years. And that's kind of where I think the two sides are. And it seems to me like it's very much a money thing. And it's not like a contentious, it's not personal or anything like that. But I think where they're at this current moment, Vikings are focusing on the draft and their free agency and stuff. And then I think after the draft, once you get closer to training camp and stuff, is usually when they start talking about extensions for their in-house guys. Like Brian O'Neill will probably get one. And that's probably where you start talking about extending Danielle Hunter, and Harrison Smith extension is also on the table as well, which can help bring their cap down and help them maybe afford some of the free agents that are still lingering. But the Danielle Hunter situation, I think, is it's a very awkward situation because everybody knows that Danielle Hunter deserves the world as a contract. If he's the highest paid defensive end, I don't think anybody would think, that's a bad idea, or that's unfair, that's an overpay, or anything like that. And it's just a matter of, do the Vikings want to bet on that neck? They want to know that neck is okay, so they're going to push it to the last second. And once Danielle Hunter comes in, starts practicing in training camp, and you can kind of see, oh wow, he's ready to go, he's healthy and he's good, and we don't have to worry about this neck anymore, then the pocketbook opens.
Yeah, and it's interesting because all these, edge rushers got so much money. The edge market was completely reset. Carl Lawson got 15, 16. Trey Hendrickson, who had one good year playing behind Cameron Jordan and Marcus Davenport, got over that. Leonard Williams with the Giants got a huge extension. So looking towards in-house guys, we can compare it to Leonard Williams, who got 3 years, $63 million with, I think, $42 million guaranteed. Danielle Hunter is sitting there like, well, I'm the youngest person to get however many sacks it is. Mm-hmm. I believe it's a crazy
the
record.
Accolades are endless. Yeah.
Like with at this age, and Leonard Williams hasn't really been great. He's a good player, and he just got $63 million with 40 plus guaranteed. He's like, well, I deserve this money too. And I might be injured right now, but I've had more production than all these guys. I deserve that.
Yeah, and he's right? Like, I don't think either side here is doing anything that is unreasonable. I think Danielle Hunter absolutely has a point. He deserves to be paid way more than he was paid. I don't think he should have taken that contract in 2018. He took an extension that was very clearly under market rate and was going to age really poorly for him. I don't think he should have taken that at all. But, it's weird to be mad at the Vikings for, continuing on that contract that he signed, right? But wanting a pay raise, I think, is totally fair. And I think the Vikings saying, well, let's wait to see if you're healthy because we don't want to pay you and then you retire next year and we're, behind the eight ball. We don't want that. So I think that's all totally fair. But I think when it comes to Danielle Hunter and how he plays, you want to keep him in the building for as long as possible. The best case scenario in all of this is the one where Danielle Hunter retires a Viking, and I don't really care what the cost of that is. If it comes to a place where you lose him and he goes and plays for the Raiders, you bungled it. So I think you got to just do what you have to do, right? And waiting for it and pushing it to the last second and waiting to see if the health comes out, I think is totally fair, though. But honestly, if I were the Vikings, I would definitely want to get him locked up right now in this cap environment versus, him playing one more year and wanting to restructure his deal to get out of here like what Anthony Barr has done. And then suddenly he's hitting free agency and you're competing with other teams and you have to pay out the nose, and that's next year. It's going to be more expensive. Get him in right now for 5 years instead of, 2 years and possibly have to renegotiate with him. Right now, if you're willing to take the risk, and personally I would be, and if you're willing to take the risk, that is, I think, the place now is the time to do it. Now is where you're going to get the best equity. It's only going to get more expensive as time goes on.
And that's what everyone's talking about, right? Is the market right now, how all these markets are down. Wide receivers were getting really low. I don't know how Kenny Golladay got $72 million with 40 plus guaranteed in this market when every other receiver was signing 1-2 year deals. And for the edges, these edges are getting 20 million with the cap way down. It's going to skyrocket up. So yeah, you're right. I don't see why it would be a bad idea to get him locked up right now, as long as, we know, okay, he's not going to retire tomorrow with that, of course, that injury in his neck. But let's switch gears a little bit. So Mike Zimmer, I loved him when he was in Cincinnati. Not sure if he's on thin ice. He might be. Where do you see his time, like his tenure right now and his future in Minnesota?
I think when you're a coach of a team for more than 3 or 4 years and you don't have a Super Bowl, which is a rare thing, right? If it's rare that you're always kind of that good, not great, or you're competitive but you don't happen to win it. He's been to an NFC Championship game. He's won playoff games, right? He can be a contender. And he's had some 8-8 years, some 7-9 years that are obviously very frustrating. And I think when you're a long tenured head coach that doesn't have that, Pete Carroll's got 2013 to kind of ride on, right? But when you're a long tenured head coach, you're on the hot seat every year, kind of no matter what. You could go 13-3, make it to the NFC Championship, and if you start out 0-6 the next year, you're still probably getting fired. So I think that's where Mike Zimmer is just going to exist for the rest of his time in Minnesota. Again, if you're, I thought with the 1-5 start in 2020, I thought the Vikings were going to pull the trigger, and then they didn't, and that kind of tells us that the Wilfs don't want to be, again, they don't want to be the Lions going through a new head coach and trying to talk themselves into a new rebuild of this team every 3 years. They want to be the Steelers, where they stick by their guy through the highs and through the lows. And so the pressure that is on Mike Zimmer from the organization is probably a lot less than the pressure that's on him from the fans and from the kind of media and the outward external pressure. And I think it just comes to a point where if the season starts on a terrible foot, and you're 1-7 and you're out of it and it's over, that's, you fire the coach, you figure out how to get rid of Kirk Cousins' contract in 2022, and then we kind of go try to figure out what to do from there. But the Wilfs don't want to hit rock bottom. They don't really feel like they need to hit rock bottom to be competitive later. Why don't you just get better players now? I guess that's the way the Wilfs see it, and I really agree with them.
And for Kirk Cousins, there were very, very early offseason rumors about a potential Kirk Cousins-Kyle Shanahan reunion down in San Francisco a couple months ago. Kirk is locked in as the quarterback. I feel like dumb bringing that up, but I'm getting mixed signals from the fan base. Some people love him. Some people just blame him for everything. I'm a Bengals fan. I compare it to Andy Dalton for 9 years. Everyone was blaming him every time he lost a game. But, Kirk Cousins signed that second contract with Minnesota to be locked in until I believe 2023. Where does he stand right now? Because all the mixed signals, he's probably not a Super Bowl quarterback, but he was productive. He was very productive last year. It was arguably his best year in his career.
He'll never be the best quarterback in the league, right? There'll always be Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes and guys that are going to be better, right? But I think, again, they won a playoff game with him, and it's very rare that you are exactly as good to only win one playoff game and never be able to do it again, right? And he played really well in that game. It's not like they just stumbled backwards into it. So I didn't like the Kirk Cousins extension in 2020. I don't like marrying the franchise to Kirk Cousins the way that they are married to him. And there's kind of two options right now with Kirk Cousins when it comes to 2022. And the choice is, do you want to keep Kirk Cousins or don't you want to keep Kirk Cousins? And that's the option the Vikings wanted to give themselves. He has a very tradable contract. All the money is guaranteed on it, but you can trade guaranteed salary. And if somebody wanted to trade for Kirk Cousins right now, they would pick him up at $21 million this year and $35 million next year. For a quarterback, that ain't bad. And then you figure out what to do with an extension, right? And so next year, if you trade him next year, they pick him up for a 1 year, $35 million, and an exclusive negotiating window. If you wanted to do that to a Kyle Shanahan, I guess he'll have his quarterback, but something like that, you could totally trade him, right? Or you extend him and you find a way to get that $45 million cap hit down via an extension, via signing bonus, basically do the same thing you did in 2020. I probably won't like that then. I didn't like it the first time because I just don't really think Kirk Cousins is a quarterback that you don't want to have the option to move on from because he is so inconsistent. He's streaky. He will put together the 4 worst games you've ever seen and then the 4 best games you've ever seen. And I don't think is capable of putting together 17 games that are consistent enough to be the best team in the league. And I don't even think he's capable of putting together 4 consistent games. I think that's the biggest problem for me with Kirk Cousins is, can you go, if you get him into the playoffs, right, you want to make a run, can he be good for 4 games in a row? We've seen that rarely. It's possible. I don't personally believe in it. The Vikings obviously disagree. And they have their reasons, right? He's got a very good arm. He's got very good accuracy. He prepares like none other. He's, fine in the locker room. People, he works hard. He sets an example and all that stuff, right? So the Vikings are way higher on him than I am. And when you're assessing what the Vikings are doing, you have to kind of say, are they, am I mad because they're not doing what I would do with Kirk Cousins, or am I mad because they are doing too much with a quarterback that they like or something like that? And so I think they're going to extend him next year. I think the deal was always functionally meant to keep Cousins in Minnesota through 2024. And I think we're here with Kirk Cousins for the long haul until everybody, until they start out, 3-12 and everybody gets fired.
So the Vikings picking at 14, 78, 90, 119, and 125. Last year they had what seemed like a bajillion picks. There's tons of young players. This year, no second round picks, so they'll go a while without picking. what has to be the top priority on this team? I can feel what's coming, so I'll just skip to it. Offensive line.
Sure.
Slater might be gone. Darrisaw might be gone. It seems like Elijah Vera Tucker could be a match made in heaven at 14.
He is somebody mocked to the Vikings very, very often. I think it'd be a little bit steep for him to pick him at 14. My number 1A outcome is the one where they trade down and then still probably get a guy that they want. But I think they're going edge rusher. I actually just published an article at zonecoverage.com, plug, where I argued that edge rusher should be the first round pick because their situation at edge rusher is in flux with Danielle Hunter. The opposite Danielle Hunter, it's really bad. Stephen Weatherly is not a starter. DJ Wanham is not a starter. And there's a lot of information in that article about why. And so you are kind of committed right now to limping into the season with only one edge rusher and 2 defensive tackles that can't pass rush. They just don't have a pass rush. They need a pass rush really, really, really bad. It's an emergency if you ask me. So I think spending a first round pick on that is entirely justifiable, but the offensive line has been a thing for a long time. I don't think it's as severe of a problem right now. The offensive line that they would trot out if they had to play tomorrow is, I think, better than the ones that they've trotted out in previous years. Not that that's saying much, and they definitely still have some work before I would consider that unit complete. So taking somebody like Elijah Vera Tucker, I think, is also perfectly justifiable. I think a wide receiver is justifiable. I think a cornerback is justifiable. But for me, I think an edge rusher is the best move. And because those edge rushers don't seem like they're going a lot in the top 15 picks, I don't think they are. I think if you picked at 20, you still have your pick of whichever one you want. So trade down to 20 or 21. And if you can, get a little bit of extra equity, get back into the second round. They have 2 third-round picks. And if they can trade down a little bit, package one of those third-round picks, get that thing up to the second round, and get an interior offensive lineman there, then I think you're made in the shade.
Yeah, and, Kwity Paye, Azeez Ojulari, Jalen Phillips, kind of the consensus top 3 guys, and no one's mocking either of them in the top 10, maybe even top 12. I think you can look at the Giants as the first team that might take an edge rusher there. Like, people have said Atlanta could trade down and go edge rusher, that they're not taking one at 4. But other than that, it's a very good edge class, but not many teams at the top, because when 4 at least, maybe 5 quarterbacks are getting picked in the top 10, then you have to add all the skill players. Unless there's a Chase Young or Joey Bosa or Nick Bosa at the top, edge is kind of the forgotten position. So, yeah, you'll definitely get the choice between the 2 at 14, between at least one of the 3. And definitely, if you trade down to 20, at least one of 4, you might add Rousseau from Miami as well. Maybe some other guys. It's a very good class, so they'll get their pick, whether they're picking at 14, 23, 25.
Yeah, there's like 5 or 6 edge rushers in this class that I think are good enough at least to put in day one. Some of them are sort of unfinished products, like Kwity Paye's a little bit unfinished. Jason Owe out of Penn State is a little bit unfinished. They've got polish to do, but they're still good enough to contribute and be part of your team while they, work on those pass rush moves. And it's not one of those things where they'd have to like red shirt, right? Nobody's that bad. So I think any of those guys, trade down to 23. And if the first 2 guys go, you miss out on Paye and Phillips, and you end up with Jason Owe or Azeez Ojulari or whoever your guy is. I'm a big fan of Carlos Basham as well. If you do go offensive line in the first round, Carlos Basham might be there in the second round if you want to try to trade up. They have, again, 2 third-round picks, 4 fourth-round picks right now. So they got a ton of mid-round capital, packaging some of that up, move up into the second round, and go grab like a Wyatt Davis or a Carlos Basham. I think that's the way that I would prefer to navigate this draft, because there are people in the second round that are really, really exciting, a lot more exciting than like 3 guys in the fourth round, and one of them does make the team.
Yeah, so the offense last year scored points, thanks Justin Jefferson, right? And the defense seems as if they have more talent. Overall, the Vikings look like a very balanced team on paper for the draft. Obviously, not as many picks as they had last year, but still, like you said, a couple of mid-round picks where most teams fill out their rosters and fill out their depth is on day 3, and with, of course, undrafted free agents. Which direction do you think they'll go in the draft? Most teams go BPA, but for a team like the Vikings, very balanced. Do you kind of see them leaning one side over the other?
Yeah, I think pass rush is their biggest problem right now. And so I think dedicating the first round pick to fixing that problem is wise, and I think there will be ample opportunity to do so. You don't need to reach for need or anything like that. Like, it might be BPA anyways, and it's a good place to point that cannon. I think when it comes to the mid-round picks, it'll probably be more about, again, like where they do need depth. They need depth along the skill players. Right now, they only have 4 starting quality skill players. It's Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and I think Irv Smith counts as well. And that's you need another guy, right? So they could rotate guys like Tyler Conklin, the backup tight end, guys like TJ Ham if they want to go 21, use a fullback. Their next best wide receiver on the roster though is like Chad Beebe, and I don't know if he should make the team every year. So they need skill players pretty bad in that mid-round spot. So I would be very, very shocked if we got out of like round 4 without at least one skill player being added to the Vikings.
And it was the biggest need last year. That video that always gets posted, I see it on Twitter of Zimmer and the brass in the virtual draft.
Oh, when they passed on Justin Jefferson, yeah.
When the Eagles took Jalen Rieger, and everyone knew
I had a similar reaction.
Right. Everybody knew Jefferson was probably the pick, and turned out great. He was the best receiver in the class. I mean, the only ones close were T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk. I think Judy was fine. Ruggs was fine. And then, of course, Lamb. And it was a great class last year. I think they're all going to be very good. But Jefferson getting almost, 1,500 yards? Or did he
1,400 on the dot.
1,400 on the dot. So obviously a great year with Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen there as well, kind of just replacing Stephon Diggs. And that was just amazing for him because the best receiver on the team, most likely Diggs, now he's the top 3 receiver in the league, arguably, after the season with Josh Allen.
Oh, he already was.
Okay. You can obviously say that. And he got away from Kirk Cousins and then went to Josh Allen. Allen had a breakout year and everything. But
yes.
So Diggs leaves. Jefferson comes in, plays slot, plays on the outside. And that was a huge thing when people were evaluating him was, can he play on the outside? He played a lot of slot with Joe Burrow because Chase was playing on the outside and Terrace Marshall was playing on the outside too. So he did that. He proved everyone wrong. And I think he was a rookie of the year. Justin Jefferson played his position better than Justin Herbert played his position. And I get
inarguably.
And I get quarterbacks the sexy position, but one of my good friends here is a huge Viking, or 2 of them are huge Vikings fans, and I was like, I think Justin Jefferson should win it. He's not going to, but I think he is. Like he was a rookie of the year last year.
I think Michael Onwenu, the guard for the Patriots, has a better case for it than Justin Herbert.
he was awesome too. Wirfs too. I mean, obviously Wirfs had the playoff run, but Onwenu was really good. A 6th-round pick. I guess the Patriots. It's something with their 6th-round picks from Michigan. I guess, but
yeah.
But
he always seemed like a good sleeper candidate. No, yeah. Justin Jefferson was fantastic. I think for me the takeaway is, and this is something that I do on Locked On Vikings. I'm always looking for what can we learn from this, right? It's one thing I can sit here and vomit out a bunch of Justin Jefferson stats and say, look how good he is. What value is there to that though? Let's see, what can we learn here? Because a lot of people were down on Justin Jefferson because of the slot only thing, and being a slot only guy is a reasonable knock. If you can't put a guy outside, you should move him down your board for that. And why didn't that apply to Justin Jefferson? And I think the answer is there's more years than last year, right? He played plenty outside in his sophomore year. He did fine at that. So I don't think it should have been a concern if you scouted more than his final year, his 2019 season at LSU. And then I think the other question is focus on what your team's going to ask him to do and not necessarily thinking he's going to be a copy paste of what his college team asked him to do. Because the reason that they ended up playing him in the slot, and we had to kind of reverse engineer this. You went, okay, why did they only play him in the slot? Is it because he can't release off the line and he needs that help? Or is it because Jamar Chase and Terrace Marshall are there and everybody's SEC crappy slot corner dies to big giant Justin Jefferson? So maybe they just wanted to take advantage of slot corners with Justin Jefferson, and that worked out pretty well for LSU. Worked out fine for the Vikings as well. They had him play in the slot, I think, like 40% of the time, and he won plenty outside as well, which I think the Vikings just looked at 2018 and went, oh yeah, he's good at that too. But by pick 22, I mean, it was a no-brainer anyways, and I think the Eagles kind of outthought themselves on that one.
Yeah, because we knew both teams were going receiver. Brandon Ayuk was in the conversation. T. Higgins was in the conversation. Denzel Mims, after he ran a 4.39, was also in that conversation. He ended up falling all the way to 40, the late 40s. Jets traded up and took him. T. Higgins went to Cincinnati. Ayuk, Niners traded up and got their guy, and everyone was like, is he good? And I was like, yes, he's good. And he was great last year, especially in that system. But everyone knew that the Eagles and the Vikings were most likely probably going wide receiver. They both did. And The Eagles still can't get one. That they bricked on JJ Arcega-Whiteside, took him over DK Metcalf, and then they
Rager's
bricked
okay.
here.
He's all right. He'll be a guy for them. He was injured. It was a tough rookie year, but I think he'll work out all right for him. It's just hard to like sell Eagles fans on that when Justin Jefferson was right there.
Right, and
making headlines like every day.
After what happened with Whiteside, he just has not worked. He had an awful year last year, and when people were like, okay, maybe he's going to break out this year, maybe he's going to do something, he didn't. So we'll see what Rager does next year if he's fully healthy. I actually liked him coming out of TCU. I like all the TCU rookies last year: Niang, Rieger, Blacklock, and then of course Jeff Gladney. I absolutely love Jeff Gladney, and it's really unfortunate that first of all, it sucked that he was terrible last year, and then this whole off the field stuff, and probably has played his last game in the purple and gold. But talking about young players, as I mentioned, earlier, thanks to all the comp picks and trades last year, Cameron Dantzler, Harrison Hand, Troy Dye, Ezra Cleveland. Talk a little bit about some of these guys and who is bound to break out in 2021.
Yeah, we'll see. Ezra Cleveland's an interesting case because I don't think he should be a guard. I think moving him to guard was a mistake, and it seems, I don't know, the Vikings are doing a lot more work in free agency on getting a tackle, and the draft tackles also seem like they're encouraging the Vikings to take a tackle to replace Riley Reif and guard, and then Ezra Cleveland stays at guard, which I think is the wrong spot for him. I don't think he's going to pan out there. Cameron Dantzler, I think he might be your breakout player. He might have already kind of had his breakout time. Right. He shut down Mike Evans against Tampa Bay. He had great games against Jacksonville, against Robbie Anderson in Carolina. And, Jacksonville's a good wide receiver core. He had this unbelievable stretch of play. He played very well. And I think he can maybe be that CB1, that cornerback one. It might not even be Patrick Peterson. Cameron Dantzler might take that mantle if he continues to. I mean, he was like a top 5 corner down the stretch. It was very difficult to overstate how good it was. And if you didn't notice it, that was the point. So I think he's probably your guy, right? And if you want to go to the other players, Troy Dye, I think he's probably at his best as a special teams player. He was very clearly in over his head. He was forced into starting way before he was ready. He had no idea what was going on. And I think a lot of that that applies to a lot of the day 3 guys that ended up playing way more than they should have played, like James Lynch, and DJ Wanham is probably not a starter, but if he turns out to be a rotational guy, that's fine for a 4th round pick. If I had to go for like a dark horse that you might not see coming, it might be Kenny Willekes, who came out of Michigan State. He was supposed to be a good run defender. He might be like a good rotational guy that kind of ends up carving his way onto the team for like 5 years, kind of as the 52nd player on the roster. He just tore his ACL in the preseason, and so he missed the whole season. But that might be your dark horse guy you maybe haven't thought about. Harrison Hand figures to be a decent depth corner as well. KJ Osborne, I think that was probably a whiff. He didn't seem like he offered very much at wide receiver at all. He was kind of drafted to be a returner, and he sort of sucked at returning. The Vikings were dead last in field position after kickoffs, so that did not work out at all. And you can go over some of the 6th round guys that ended up not making the score, 6th and 7th round guys that ended up not making the team, but probably not as much impact there.
Right. So before I let you go, you're picking at 14. This is what I ask everyone. You're the GM. You're the Wilfs. Pick 14. Who are you taking?
I'll give you a board just because I don't know who's going to be there. I'll give you a quick board. I think Rashawn Slater's probably near the top of it, unless somebody crazy like Kyle Pitts falls or something. But within reason, we'll say Rashawn Slater's probably at the top of it. And then I'm probably going with edge rusher of my choice. Again, assuming if I can't trade down, I'd probably take like Kwity Paye or Jalen Phillips. Or I'm a big fan of Jason Owe, but it seems like he'll be available like 25, so it might be a reach. And then probably Elijah Vera-Tucker after that if you just can't possibly fathom not taking an offensive lineman.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Luke, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. This is great.
Of course.
What's your at? Make sure to follow him on Twitter. What's your at on Twitter?
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show at Locked On Vikings. You can find Locked On Vikings podcast wherever you find your favorite shows, and you can also find me on the Locked On NFL podcast on Tuesdays, co-hosting with my good pal Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson.
Awesome stuff from Luke. Luke, once again, thanks for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.